Greetings. I am Phil Manning, and it is my privilege and pleasure to interview Dr. Joseph van der Meulen. Dr. van der Meulen has been with the USC and now the Keck School of Medicine from 1971 till 2006, and he served in many, many capacities, notably a professor of neurology, vice president health affairs, and a couple of rounds as a dean. So he's going to be able to give us a perspective, I think, that very few people can do this. So, Joe, it's going to be fun to hear about our medical school from your perspective. I have looked at some of your credentials, and one of them that interested me was the Boston Latin. I've heard what a difficult school that is, so I want to hear, is it all true? Is it pretty disciplined, and what about it?
Yeah, I guess you'd have to say that it is quite disciplined. Actually, it goes back to 1635. It was founded 1 year ahead of Harvard. In fact, we claim that the reason that Harvard was founded was so there would be a place for the Boston Latin School boys to continue their education. I remember one Latin teacher that I had, a Mr. Roach, and every day you had to do an assignment on the board and check all of the endings of the Latin phrases, etc. And he would take off a half a point for every error. And the total was 5 points. So with 10 errors, you got to 0. But he didn't stop there. If you had more than 10, he started doing minus numbers. Actually, it is a very difficult school, and one had to take an examination to enter. And it's actually a public school. It's not a private school. And so the people from all over the city would take this examination to get into the school. You'd go in on the 7th grade and go through the 4 years of high school. I took Latin for 6 years. I opted out of the last year when I could have taken Greek. But it really was a fantastic experience, and I think put me in a good frame of mind for handling medical school.
Yeah. Well, then you went on to Boston College and Boston University School of Medicine. And as a matter of fact, you majored in mathematics to begin with. Well,
I thought I was going to be a mathematician, but after 2 years, I decided that I didn't know whether the future was that bright in mathematics, although I've been proven wrong. And so I thought I'd switch over to medicine and took my pre-medical courses in the last 2 years.
Then, after graduating from medical school, you was, I think, on the Cornell Service at Bellevue.
That's right. I did a year of internal medicine after an internship on the Cornell Service. And as one might imagine, Bellevue was quite an experience as well.
I'm going to want you to compare that with our county hospital when we get.
Well, there are a lot of similarities, and it actually is one of the things that attracted me to LA County was my affinity for hospitals like that, because I had also done my training as a medical student at the Boston City Hospital. And then you became a doctor to the Marines in Camp Pendleton. Well, when I was finishing up my second year of residency, I learned that there was a program in neurology training for people who wanted to go into the Navy, or who had to go into the Navy. And so I opted for that program and was accepted. So I spent 3 months at the Philadelphia Naval Hospital, where Dr. Alpers from Temple was the head of neurology, and did 3 months of neurology training. And then I was transferred out to Camp Pendleton in Oceanside. And when I arrived, the chief there was an orthopedist, the chief medical officer, and he asked me what I'd done. And I said, well, I had 2 years of medicine. And he said, well, we have a large number of dependents out here. What we really need is a pediatrician. And I said, well, I really don't know very much about pediatrics other than what I had in medical school. He said, that's all right, just cut the dose in half.
I guess it worked most of the time.
Well, I ended up, and they put me on pediatric night call, and I did neurology during the daytime. So if I had a child with seizures, I would refer them to the neurologist the next morning and change hats.
And then you went back to Boston City and worked on the neurology service with Denny Brown, I think.
Well, when I was at Camp Pendleton, I applied to the 2 Harvard neurology programs in Boston, one under Ray Adams at the Mass General, and the other with Derek Denny Brown at Boston City. And one day I got a telegram back from Boston City from Derek Denny Brown accepting me in that position. So I went into town and sent a telegram back accepting it. When I got back to the base, there was another telegram from Ray Adams offering me the position at Mass General. And I often wonder what would have happened if I had received those telegrams in the reverse order.
What kind of a guy was?
For one thing, I wouldn't
sorry.
have met the woman who was going to become my wife,
Yeah.
who was Dr. Denny Brown's spinal fluid technician.
So good choice. What kind of a man was he to work with? I've heard a lot about him.
Dr. Denny Brown.
Yeah.
Well, he was quite a taskmaster. I remember one session we had a Saturday morning. We used to do grand rounds. And I had to present a case of a patient with a spinal cord lesion. And I had done a myelogram in the nighttime at that time to see whether or not there was a block. And some of the dye had gotten extradural, and so it did not make a good picture that you could define the lesion. And so Denny Brown, in front of all of the assembled group, wanted to know why I had decided to do that. And I said, well, I wanted to see whether or not that there was a lesion that would need an operation. And he said, well, did the neurosurgeons force you into this? And I said, no, I really thought that was the best thing to do. So he dropped it for a moment or two, went on to another case, and then he came back and he said, but I really don't understand why you did that. And you know, once you've ruined the myelogram, you've sort of ruined the case. And I just nodded quietly. And he went on, and then about 15 minutes later came back. He said, I really don't think that that's a good idea to be doing LPs like that and doing myelograms. So after I had been thoroughly humiliated with the group, we got into the elevator to go down to lunch. And he turned to me and he said, I hope you don't mind me joshing you a bit back there. But we actually had one of our residents who quit the program because he just couldn't take it.
He could make a point, though.
That's right.
And then you had the opportunity to go to Stockholm and work with Professor Grunic.
Well, when I was finishing up my second year of neurology residency, I told Dr. Denny Brown that I was interested in neurophysiology. He had trained in neurophysiology under Sir Charles Sherrington in England. And his other two companions at that time were Ragnar Granit, who is now at the Nobel Institute in Stockholm, and Sir John Eccles, who was at Canberra in Australia. And so he asked me whether I wanted to go to Stockholm or to Australia, and I decided I'd rather go to Stockholm. So I went and joined this service at Karolinska Institute, the Nobel Institute.
Yeah. Well, Grunic was also a Nobel laureate, wasn't he?
Well, as a matter of fact, Sherrington got the Nobel Prize, and Grunic got the Nobel Prize, and Eccles got the Nobel Prize. The only one who didn't get it was Denny Brown, who became a clinician.
And then you took a job as, I think, associate professor of neurology at Case Western Reserve.
Well, actually, when I finished at Karolinska, I came back to Boston City for several years and did some research there as well as doing private practice. And then the former chief of neuropathology, Joe Foley, who had been at Boston City, had since gone to Western Reserve. And he recruited me to come out to Western Reserve. Mm-hmm. So I joined him there.
Yeah. And then, with all those good credentials, how come you came so far west to come to USC?
Well, I was moving west, as you can see.
Yeah.
And I had had the experience at Camp Pendleton, which I enjoyed very much, particularly the lifestyle. I found out that when you had time off, you could go skiing or you could go swimming mm-hmm. or whatever. And as I mentioned before, I had an affinity for public hospitals, having trained at Boston City and at Bellevue. And I had always had a feeling that this was the best place to train students. It was a good place to carry out clinical research.
Sure.
And it also was an opportunity to help indigent patients.
Yeah. So you took the job as a professor of neurology and head of the department.
Well, I got a phone call one wintry day from Franz Bauer. And I said, don't hang up. I'm sure we can work something out. So it didn't take a lot of convincing.
Well, you established, I think, and continued to improve the Department of Neurology. And could you give us some reminiscences as what went on during your tenure there?
Well, the first thing that hit me was the volume of patients. I wasn't quite ready for the fact that we were getting 15 to 20 patients a night with, I think we had 4 or 5 residents at that time throughout the three-year service. And so that at that time we were having patients that we were putting in the corridors because we just didn't have enough beds in the wards. And I felt that that was not a good learning experience to have so many patients, and many of them were what we might call routine strokes. And so I made a deal with the chair of medicine, who was Jack Bethune, that we would send somebody to the emergency room on a 24/7 call to help make a decision whether or not these patients were teaching cases that we could spend some time on and really do in depth, and have the routine strokes, as it were, be sent to general medicine. And he agreed to do that because his residents were rotating through neurology, and he wanted them to have a good learning experience. So with that, we were able to cut it down to about 5 admissions a night. Probably one of the other things that struck me was that I had to learn Spanish because we had so many Spanish-speaking patients. I took a course in medical Spanish, so I was able to get through a rather routine examination with without the help of an interpreter.
Well, now,
but the other thing that was of interest at LA County was that my predecessor, Howard Barrows, had established a program called the Program Patient, in which he took aspiring actors from Hollywood and taught them how to give a neurological history of a certain disease, and also how to feign some of the findings that you might find. And I wondered, with 20 patients a night, why did I need to be manufacturing patients? But I think it became apparent soon enough that this was a good teaching tool, because all of the students would be faced with the same patient giving the same history, and you could compare them. And also, the patient could then give feedback as to how well the student had performed. And interestingly enough, this has become a tool that's been used now in many board examinations and in training throughout the country.
Yeah, Howard has gotten a number of awards for that concept, and it's been very valuable. Well, now, at the time you were chairman, many people around the city and around Southern California said this is the best clinical neurologist we have. Now, what enticed you to give up that reputation and go into administration?
Well, I'm not quite sure I understood having that reputation, but
it was there.
I was actually, we used to meet, the chairs used to meet with the dean on a weekly basis. And I was rather outspoken about some of the problems that we faced, and so they decided to make me the chairman of the chairman. And so I became sort of involved with a lot of the issues, particularly at the county. And from there, I was also involved in some committees at the main campus with Jack Hubbard and with Zorab Kaprilyan, who was his executive vice president. And so I gradually moved in that direction. And earlier in the 70s, there had been a committee that had proposed that they develop a new office called the Vice President for Health Affairs. They felt that they weren't getting adequate representation on the University Park campus. And the people on the University Park campus felt that they didn't really know enough to be able to evaluate the health sciences. And it was a movement that was gaining momentum throughout the country. So they established that office, and they recruited Ed Ackle, a dentist from Florida, who became the first Vice President for Health Affairs. Unfortunately, Ed didn't get along very well with either Zorab Kaprilyan or with a member of the faculty. And on one occasion, he was very upset with the faculty who were doing their research at the county instead of through the university, and so the overhead costs were going to the county rather than through the attending staff association, rather than through the university. And he got into a bit of a contretemps with some of the faculty and told them at one general meeting that they could all be replaced. Shortly thereafter, he left to go to Virginia Commonwealth University.
Right. Yeah. Well, I remember those days. Now, as you assumed the duties then as Vice President Health Affairs.
Well, that was the next step. Because
okay.
I think I had experience with dealing with the county, and I had experience in working with the department chairs, and also some of the committee work I had done on the main campus. I think that Jack Hubbard felt that I was the person who might be able to fill that job. I was offered the job on a year-to-year basis, and it lasted a little bit longer than that.
It did. And what were your main functions and duties at that time?
Well, the main job was to serve as a liaison between the health sciences schools and the main university. And at that time, we had dentistry, pharmacy, and medicine. And we had what were called the allied health professions, which were PT and OT, physical therapy and occupational therapy. And So I acted as sort of overseer of their budgeting and of their program development. I also had responsibility for our relationships with the county and our negotiations of our annual contract with them. And I was also involved as a board member on all of our affiliated hospitals. So I sat on about 6 hospital boards at that time as well.
I remember that, and I think you had a certain upbeat view of the school and the community, and I think the image of the university was enhanced by your being on the boards of these various hospitals. I've heard that also.
Well, I think it gave us an insight into what the other hospitals were doing, and also we got to meet the other board members, which were very helpful in our fundraising and other efforts.
Now, what did you like doing the best? What was your most satisfying part of that job?
Well, during my tenure as vice president, there were 3 things that I felt that I had got the most satisfaction from. One was the ongoing relationships with the county, because we had to face problems with them on an annual basis, or almost on a daily basis. And the second was I felt that we needed to develop a private practice plan and to develop a university hospital if we were going to be able to compete with UCLA as far as recruiting new faculty. And then finally, I felt that we needed a school of nursing if we were going to be a comprehensive academic health center, and therefore felt we should establish a school of nursing and integrate the independent health professions. Actually, the university did not want us to have a school because they didn't want to reduplicate a lot of administrative overhead. So the independent health professions were really called divisions of the independent health professions. Now, originally they were called the allied health professions, but they objected to the fact that they were allied because it meant they had to be allied to someone, and they wanted to be independent. So we allowed them to change their name to the independent health professions.
I was disappointed when the university saw fit to discontinue the nursing school. And
Well,
at a time when there's such a shortage and all, it seemed to me it would have been a major thing to keep.
And so was I, but the nursing school had a rather rocky development. It started because originally there had been a nursing school at USC associated with at the California Hospital, which was closed. But then they were thinking of starting up a new school, but they wanted it to be university affiliated. So we discussed this with them, and through the help of Kathleen McCarthy, one of our trustees, and her husband Tom, who were part of the Levy Foundation, which was Kathleen's family, they put up the money to build a facility on the grounds of the California Hospital that could be used for the nursing school. And so that's how it got started. And then after that, I wanted to try to put all of the independent health schools together, because physical therapy and occupational therapy was spread out over the city. They were either at Rancho Los Amigos, some of them were on the main campus, but none of them were on the health sciences campus. So we were able to acquire a building from the county, which we named the Center for the Health Professions, in which we brought in PT, OT, and nursing, and we established my office there as well. And we then sort of acted as an overseer of that operation and helped them with development and other things.
Now, not only were you Vice President Health Affairs, but you had a couple of runs at being the Dean.
Well, before we get into that, you had asked me why they closed the nursing school.
Yes.
And I think that the...
I was disappointed that they did. I didn't know.
Yes, I was too, because
Yeah.
we certainly needed them. But there had always been some financial problems with developing their budget, even with assistance from PT and OT. But there was also some concern that they were so clinically oriented that they weren't probably the image that people wanted for an academic research university. And so after a number of false starts, they went forward with that. And they closed the school in, I guess, 2005. And they then, when I retired from the vice president's office, they actually took PT and OT and put that under dentistry, because they did away with the office of the vice president of health affairs.
Yeah, yeah. That was kind of the trend at the time, wasn't it?
Well, it was interesting that if one looked around the country, that through the 80s there was an increase in the number of people who were vice presidents. And this was always resented somewhat by the chairs of the independent health schools, particularly medicine, because they always wanted to report either to the president or to a provost. And now they had to go through another layer of bureaucracy and a vice president. So that the ones that were successful were those that usually had a university hospital, and they were able to control better the medical schools, because the medical schools were dependent upon the hospital. Unfortunately, we didn't have that. And so our dream of trying to get an academic health center that was integrated and included nursing and the health professions never really came to fruition. We did integrate the independent health professions, but we were unable to do this with the other schools. And over time, with succeeding administrations, the schools of dentistry, pharmacy, and medicine then reported directly to the provost.
Now tell me about the deanship.
Well, the deanship was sort of short-lived. I took over the first deanship when Alan Mathias stepped down, and I spent the time recruiting a new chair, a new dean, and that was Bob Tranquata, who had been with us before as a chief medical officer at LA County, and he was somebody who was quite familiar with USC and with the county hospital. And I went back to his home in Massachusetts. He was at the University of Massachusetts as chancellor at that time. And went out to his house during a wintry snowstorm, and it was not too hard to convince him to come back to the University of Southern California.
Now, with this experience, pretty much top-level administration in the medical school, you came across trustees, university presidents, and a number of department heads. Could you give us a feeling about some of the people that you worked with at that level?
Well, I think the person that I had the most involvement with was Jack Hubbard, who was the one who made my original appointment. Jack was an interesting fellow. He had been in Texas, and so he loved Texas Aggie jokes from A&M. And he had a very dry sense of humor, which was very appealing. He was also very competitive in sports, and he was a sports enthusiast of the first order. And he used to invite me out to play golf with him at LA Country Club. And he'd always wait till the last hole to sink the putt that would take the money. He also felt himself to be sort of an erstwhile football coach. And I remember one instance when John Robinson had the team playing in Hawaii, and he was on the sidelines, and he commented to one of the referees in no uncertain terms what he thought of one of the calls that he made. And the team was penalized at that time at a very critical point in the game, whereupon John Robinson sat the president down and told him to be quiet for the rest of the game.
I remember that well. I was listening to that game, and they first, they couldn't believe that it was the president. They said somebody on the sidelines, and they said, I think it might have been the president. So that was what it was.
Well, Jack used to say that when they won a game, it was because the coach had followed the advice that he had given them at halftime. Yeah. That when they lost a game, the coach had done what he wanted to do himself without his advice.
Well,
I had another interesting episode with Jack, though. He was flying back from a long flight, and when he got off the plane, he called me up and he said he'd had a stroke. And I said, well, Jack, tell me exactly what this stroke entailed. And he said, well, I tried to get up and my foot was a little bit numb and it was weak and I couldn't lift my foot. And I said, well, did you cross your legs during that long flight that you had? And he said, well, yeah, I did. And I said, well, I think what happened is you pressed on your peroneal nerve, which caused the foot drop. And I don't think that you had a stroke. And I said, within time, that thing will recover and you should be fine. And this is what happened. And from that point forward, he left the diagnosis up to me.
So a neurologist worked out pretty well as an administrator right. in that case.
Right.
How about any activities with the trustees?
Well, it was one, the fact that we were able to meet with the trustees on a regular basis was part of Jack's strategy. And thus we were able to meet them on occasions that were not formal all the time. In one instance, I remember that George Scharfenberger, who was the chairman of the Board of Trustees, was sitting in, when I made a presentation about some of the problems we were having at the county. And he listened very intently, and then he turned to me and he said, Joe, That's very interesting, and I understand it's a problem, but what's the answer? What's the solution? So I came to realize that the trustees really didn't want to hear about all of our problems unless we had a solution for them as well. I also had the good fortune to become quite friendly with Ken Leventhal, another trustee, who happened to have a condo up at Sun Valley. And every year around February, he would invite the president and the dean and myself and a number of other trustees to join him for a week of skiing. So that was a great time for which we could get together and talk about health affairs in a very relaxed atmosphere.
You worked with some other presidents, too.
Yes, the next one was Jim Zumberg, and he was quite the antithesis of Jack Hubbard as far as his manner and demeanor. He was very controlled and very sort of reserved, and having been an Antarctic explorer, he kept detailed notes of such as logbooks, and he was very meticulous. I remember going to his office one time where he had a photograph in which he was wedged in an ice crevasse, and someone had taken a picture of him from below, silhouetted against the sun. And I thought that that was a very appropriate thing for a president, to be between a rock and a hard place. And it also showed his adventuresome spirit. Yeah. So, and I think that that was true of him. It was also reported that when he used to take his summer vacations up in, I think, Wyoming in the mountains, he used to drop into the local bar and play honky-tonk piano, which was a complete opposite to his personality on the campus.
He was kind of a likable guy and a quiet
he was very
way,
likable,
thought,
right. And had been trained as a Marine as well, so he was very disciplined.
Yeah. And then Dr. Sample.
Well, Dr. Sample is a remarkable person who I think understands completely what it takes to be a successful president. He makes publicity about almost all of our accomplishments on a wide scale so that none of our accomplishments go unnoticed. He's also a phenomenal fundraiser and is now talking about a $5 billion fundraiser to beat the $2 billion one that they completed. He's also very interesting. He continues to teach during his time as president. Teaches a course on leadership with Warren Bennis, and he has written a book about the contrarian aspects of being a true leader, which he takes the position that things that don't seem obvious but seem actually contrary to what you think you should do, you should probably do sometimes because it opens up new vistas. I think he's also very fortunate to have his wife Catherine, who is I would say the ultimate in a president's wife, and she's very helpful to him. And I just don't know how much longer he's going to go on, but I think that he's done such a remarkable job, including improving the academic programs as well as the fundraising, that we've been very well served by his
I fully agree with that. And actually, a few years ago, they were out nearly 7 nights a week doing something for the university. It was a very demanding job, the way he enforced it, the way he did it.
Yeah, he also has a good sense of humor and starts off all of his talks with, "And now for my joke," which usually gets a laugh before he even says anything.
No, he's done really well. Now, you've been with a number of deans of the School of Medicine, too.
Yes, I think that there are 5 or 6 deans, and then I've been dean myself a couple of times, and 3 presidents. The first dean that I had experience with was Franz Bauer, who, as I mentioned, called me on a wintry day in Cleveland and convinced me to come out to USC. He was a Renaissance man, you know, who was trained in the arts as well as in science. And one thing I remembered about him was he was very sociable, and his wife Marge, who was a dermatologist, was active as well. And I remember being at a social event at his house one time, and he had a little dachshund. And when he would play a Viennese waltz, the dachshund would dance. But
he sort of sang, too, I think. He howled, as I remember.
Well, he howled, that's right. It was as he danced.
Yeah, right.
And Franz was a very interesting fellow in that he was able to get his nuclear medicine boards while he was dean, which to me was an outstanding accomplishment. After he stepped down, he went to Rancho, where he was practicing nuclear medicine until he unfortunately had an untimely death from a heart attack.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Who is next?
The next one that followed him was Alan Mathias, who had been his associate dean. And Alan is a pediatrician who had strong ties to the county. And his wife, Wida, had ties as well, being very active in the care support group. Alan was a very able person who I think had probably one of the best comprehensions of the budget, and was sort of a no-nonsense guy. And interestingly enough, he also had a fantastic singing voice. And he used to sing the national anthem at the Dodger games. And I used to sit behind him at the football games, and I could hear his voice above all others as he sang the national anthem there as well.
Right.
And Alan was the one who probably did most of the work getting things prepared for the new hospital and the private practice plan.
Mm-hmm. And then Bob Trinquata.
Yes, Bob was the one who had previously been the medical director at LA County Hospital, and had also been, I think, on the McCone Commission that looked at the Watts riots.
Yes.
And then he was actually the USC representative on Martin Luther King board for a while. And he was very committed to the community and continued to be that when we brought him back. He came at the time when the new hospital was just being opened, the University Hospital. And unfortunately, the times were changing, and the potential for the University Hospital was predicated on some principles that were changed when managed care came into being, and we had to deal with a lot of insurance companies and managed care companies rather than dealing with individual physicians referring patients. And so he stepped down after several years, but had major financial difficulties.
Yes.
In his.
Were there any or many department heads that you reacted to and with that you would have any comments about?
Well, not really.
In a calm way.
I remember one time that Jack Bethune was walking over the neurology wards, and I just talked with him and asked him what he was doing there. And he accused me of kicking him off of the ward. But probably one of the best chairs that I worked with was Ted Culligan, because when we decided that we really had to get into the private practice organization and develop a university hospital, we assigned him the task of setting up the private practice plan, which he did, and did a remarkable job. The plan was predicated on the fact that we wanted to give maximum flexibility to the departments, but with the least amount of taxation.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first canvassed the United States to find out about private practice plans, I was told that they only lasted a year or two at the most. And fortunately, the one that we have in place is still in place with some modifications after, I guess it was 1983 when it was first approved by the Board of Trustees. And that was due to the fine work of Ted Culligan and Tom Moran on my staff.
Looking back, what would you think was your most rewarding, personally rewarding experiences?
Well, I think there were three. One was the ability to maintain a relationship with the county despite all of the travails that we had with them. The second was the development of the private practice plan and the development of the university hospital. And the third was establishing the School of Nursing and getting the integration of the independent health professions. The county hospital was an interesting situation because when I came, almost all of the people from our faculty were employees of the county. Yeah. And we felt that if we were going to develop a faculty practice, we had to have more flexibility. So that we worked with the county to arrange that the people who wanted to become USC employees could do so, and that we would get paid one lump sum at the beginning of the year for the total years, which could amount to in the order of $70 or $75 million. And with that, we were able to use the money invested to pay for the overhead necessary to run the programs. There was a lot of concern by the university about taking on such an obligation, but we felt that it was absolutely essential if we were going to develop a faculty practice. Mm. And as it worked out, the county was being concerned that we would sort of neglect them. But there were probably maybe 150 or 200 people who elected to stay with the county because of their investment in their future, their retirement plans, et cetera, and were not interested in practice particularly. But the others came over to USC, and we were able to institute this new payment plan, which really worked to our benefit. Over the last few years, this has changed, where the county now goes back to a quarterly payment because they feel they like to keep their money a little bit longer. Now, one of the things that we had a problem with the county is that even though we had a multi-year contract with them, it had to be approved as far as the amount every year by the Board of Supervisors. So every year we had to go through a process of showing that we were performing the work that was being required of us in order to make sure that they didn't cut us back. And despite that, there were reductions for a number of reasons as the county budgets, suffered.
Yeah.
In fact, in the mid-90s, when Sally Reed was the CAO, she made a proposal to the Board of Supervisors to close the county hospital.
Mm.
And as you might imagine, that would be catastrophic for us, and we felt catastrophic for the county as well.
Absolutely.
So I joined with Jane Pisano from the main campus, was one of the President Sample's vice presidents. And we made the rounds of the various supervisors to try to convince them that this was not an appropriate action to take, that it would be devastating to the patients, and obviously would be devastating to our program, and since we had taken over the cost of all of the faculty. And we tried to convince them that what they really needed was an outside committee, a blue ribbon committee, to take a look at this to see if this really was the best solution. In fact, we recommended that this committee be established by USC, but they didn't think that was a good idea. But they did establish a blue ribbon committee under one of the former legislators, I think his name was Meulen, and they did an evaluation which ultimately resulted in the decision not to close the hospital, but to develop a new plan for handling patients as outpatients and prevention and increasing the efficiency of the hospital. One of my fondest memories from that is we were obviously in concert with the unions as far as our opposition to closing the hospital. And a picture was taken of me on the front steps of the county hospital with union banners behind me and all around me, which I call my Jimmy Hoffa picture. And fortunately, by working together with the unions, we were able to effect a new approach to medical care that would be more cost effective. And at the same time, we received a bailout from the federal government, and Bill Clinton actually flew out to LAX and they made the first presentation on the tarmac before he just flew back. So that really was very beneficial.
Yes. Now, your tenure extends from 1971 to 2006. What has changed during that period?
Well, it's been a remarkable change in the medical school. If you think back to when we first came there, most of the department chairs were community physicians who were part-time physicians who were not full-time academics. There was some research going on, but most of it had to do with clinical research. There was not a lot of basic research. There was no cancer hospital at that time, and there was no university hospital. And over the years, with the advent of development of a cancer hospital, the development of a private practice plan and a university hospital, we've been able to recruit more academics to head departments and to carry out research. So that now that we have not only the university hospital and the cancer hospital, we have two new research towers, the Topping Tower and now the Harley Norris Tower in the Cancer Center to develop that research. We have the Zilka Neurogenetic Institute, and we have the Doheny, which was very instrumental in developing our eye program. So that now we have not only the people, but we also have the facilities to carry out much of the work that's needed to be competitive with the other, particularly UCLA in the community.
Yes, right. What's the future going to be for the Keck School of Medicine?
Well, I'm very optimistic about the future. I think with the new dean, Carmen Pugliafito, who not only has his boards in ophthalmology, but has an MBA from Wharton School of Business, I think we have the kind of person that we need to carry us through this changing environment on the business side and help us to come to a successful conclusion with the litigation that we have with Tenet over the university hospital, so that we can take it over and run it properly so that it can be useful in the future for us. And if if you take a look at the other things that are on the planning board, there's the new research building, number 3, and also the Broad Institute. And hopefully we will expand our plans for a molecular or a research biomedical industrial plan for the periphery around the medical school.
Yeah.
So on the whole, I think that we've come a long way, and I'm hoping that as we expand that we will include all of the other health sciences schools in this expansion so that it will fulfill my original dream of having a comprehensive academic health center.
Now, you've been retired nearly 2 years now.
Has it been that long?
What are you up to? What are you doing?
Well, I've been serving on the Lifetime Achievement Award for the Emeritus Center, and that's a very interesting experience to see the people who have spent their lives here and how much good they've done for the university. Just last week, I participated in a training session for the first-year medical students in how to do a neurological exam, so I haven't forgotten that.
Good.
And I've also been instrumental in helping to raise some funds through the Epilepsy Foundation so that we could recruit a pediatric epileptologist for the county hospital. So that's been really beneficial. So I still haven't decided how much time I want to spend in neurology, because even though neuroanatomy doesn't change, a lot of the techniques and the treatments do. And so I'm still on the clinical staff as an emeritus professor of neurology. I'm also still on the hospital board, about 3 or 4 hospitals. California Hospital and the Bauer Respiratory Hospital and the Good Samaritan Hospital. And I'm also very active with the Scott Newman Foundation, which is a group that was put together by Paul Newman when his son died of a drug overdose, in which we have a camp that we run in the summertime for mothers who have substance abuse or violence. And they go up there with their children and spend a week bonding together. And that's been very rewarding to be involved in something like that.
Yeah. Well, how's the golf game?
Well, unfortunately, I've lost all my distance, and I have to depend upon my putting and my chipping. And although I get a lot of strokes, so I think that it is helpful.
Well, you have made a great many contributions to the university and to the School of Medicine. So, congratulations on your retirement, and thank you for all you've done for USC.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Phil, for willing to do this with me. But I also want to thank you for those wonderful continuing education courses you gave in Hawaii, in which I had the good opportunity to participate on a number of occasions.
Well, you know, I can't put that in the past. I did other things, but that's what people remember. So I don't know what to say.
Well, I can always remember us standing on the beach at Waikiki with a bunch of Aussies from down under and from New Zealand singing Waltzing Matilda.
That's right. That's right. Well, again,
thank you.
You betcha.